We have so much of what we want that we've pretty much forgotten what it's like to need anything. And this sounds great. This is what all of our ancestors were striving for throughout their entire lives, was to just have enough resources, to have enough food, to not have to worry, to have somewhere to live that wasn't going to get blown down or raided or taken away from them somehow, to have enough clothes to stay warm. These basic needs were what all of human history was about up until now, up until basically right now. Just the last little blip of time in human history. And again, this sounds like it's a great thing, right? And on the one hand, it is. But on the other hand, what it means is we're no longer hungry. We're not hungry for anything. It is too easy for all of us to live our entire lives inside our comfort zone. And the comfort zone is a bad thing for us because we essentially begin to waste away when we spend too long in it. There is a way philosophically that one might say, I'm just going to enjoy what my ancestors set up for me. That's my life. I'm just going to live a life of hedonism, of pleasure. But what we see over and over again is that that tends to lead to ruin. Wherever one's sole focus in life is to enjoy themselves, is to take pleasure, they tend to get into trouble. Hooked on drugs is a classic. Ending up with children that they don't see from random sexual encounters. Getting themselves into trouble with the law. Because we tend to seek as human beings. It's programmed into us. And so if we're not seeking some kind of wholesome progression, whether that be progression for oneself or progression for the whole, whether we're talking about self-actualization or self-transcendence, we tend to want to see some kind of progression, some kind of movement. We get confused thinking that if we can stack more pleasure, that is the progression that we seek. But the problem with this is you can't just keep taking more drugs. It doesn't work like that. You would die if you really took that to the extreme, and people do. Hey, people do. It's tragic. But wise people have figured out throughout time that if they take, in the case of the Stoics, what they called voluntary discomfort, or if they take, in the case of the Buddhists, voluntary renunciation, then actually this is a way to counter the abundance that we have in our lives now. And it's interesting that we're talking about people actually in ancient history. The Stoics and the original Buddhists were around thousands of years ago. I don't actually know the dates on the Stoics exactly, but I know that the Buddha was around 2,500 years ago. And already he was talking about renunciation. Well, how much more shit do we have now in 2024 than when these kinds of philosophies were created? All the more reason, friend, for us to think about voluntary discomfort, voluntary renunciation in our lives. But it's super important that we have a why, that we have a reason to do this. For me, I was always dealing with stress as my principal problem. Toward the end of my 20s, I was chronically stressed to the point that I was causing myself physical pain. Morning till night was just in constant pain in my back. And so I had to seek a solution. And of course, like everyone in our culture, the first solution that I sought was the solution of pleasure, of instant gratification. So I would go for all those easy things that we can all get our hands on: video games, pornography, food, junk food, booze, recreational drugs, the whole lot. If it was something that could distract me momentarily from the pain that I was in, then I would go for it. Now, I will say I'm blessed to not have an addictive personality, so I never fell down that rabbit hole. I was always able to moderate to some degree what was going on. Nonetheless, I had enough of a taste of all of that to see it was not a solution. It was a band-aid. It was just masking over the problem, distracting me for a moment, making me feel good for a moment. But of course, that feeling good was dependent on external stuff. So I had to get the booze, I had to get the food, I had to go online, I had to have stuff in order to feel okay. Well, seeing again and again and again and again and again that didn't work, I was forced to explore other means. And at some point in my journey, I started to ask questions like, is there anyone who has this shit figured out? And that question led me to the monks. There's lots of people among the community of Buddhist monastics who claim, at least, to have figured this shit out. And the first thing that struck me about these people was that they had very little. They intentionally had very little. Typically, a Buddhist monk keeps a robe, a bowl, and a hut. That's all their belongings. And of course, they have access to other things, but those belong to the monastery. Their personal belongings are very, very few. And even within the monastery, they live that very simple, basic, austere lifestyle. They renounce worldly pleasures, so to speak, in order to live a simple life that is free of distraction. And here's what I discovered when I went on a 10-day silent retreat to get a taste of the monastic life, was essentially when everything is taken away, we are backed into a corner where the only way we're going to feel okay is if we discover or cultivate, or both, that resource inside of ourselves, that resource of calmness, of joy, of well-being inside of ourselves. So one strategy is to remove all of the options for worldly pleasure, such that one is forced to figure out how to be well by themselves with no external resources. This was quite a shock for me, coming from this millennial lifestyle to where I had everything stripped away. And the experience of that retreat was up and down, was the best way to describe it. Moments of pure joy, where I really felt I'd cracked it, and then moments of despair. I remember there wasn't even reading material on this retreat. That they arranged, the retreat organizers arranged a table of writings by the main teacher from that monastery. And then they also had dictionaries for people for whom English was a second language, so that they could access the teaching materials. They could look up words that they didn't understand. Well, at some point, I'd had enough of the teaching materials, and I was so bored that I found myself reading the introductory material in the dictionaries that were provided. I even read one of them twice. It was a short piece on the history of the English language, and it seemed like the most interesting thing I'd ever read or encountered in my life. This was maybe on day 7 or 8 of that retreat. And this showed me just how adjusted my brain was to stimuli. Out here in the world, it's so easy to just spend all of our time playing video games, scrolling YouTube. Constant stimulation. And that was where I'd come from. That was how I grew up. Video games were my first hobby as a kid. It was very much all I wanted to do when I was a kid. And given that all of this stuff is so new, things are moving so quickly now that no one really thought to moderate my intake as a child of these highly stimulating activities. So I had to figure it out for myself. And going on that retreat was part of a long process of figuring out that, hey, renunciation is a good thing. It's good for us to moderate our inputs. But there was a deeper level for me to discover. And that deeper level was that removing stimuli from your environment is kind of level 1 renunciation. And the reason that this is level 1 is because you can actually remain trapped. I spent a lot of my time on that retreat daydreaming about all the stimuli that I was missing, which meant I hadn't really renounced them. Now, I did some good work toward that, and again, removing the stimuli from your environment is one way to force the issue, to force yourself to give stuff up. Otherwise, you're just going to remain miserable. But what I'm talking about here is renunciation level 2 is renunciation in the mind, renunciation in the heart, actual giving up, actual letting go of the things that you want. And here's the really cool thing about that, is that you don't actually have to change anything about your environment in order to access that level 2 renunciation. In other words, it is possible to skip the middleman, say, I'm not going to change anything, or rather, I don't have to change anything. The work to be done is in the mind. The work to be done is in the heart. I'm going to let go of my attachments of things. Usually this requires some meditation practice, some mindfulness practice. At the very least, it requires a change of perspective, which is what I'm here to offer. To see that, yes, you could throw everything you own away. You could hire a skip. I'm not sure if you use that word in the US. Here we call it a skip. You hire essentially a massive iron bin that sits outside your house for a period, and then a truck comes and takes it away. So you could throw everything out. That would be one way to get a handle on renunciation. But what I'm telling you is you don't have to. And what I see is that for the people that I work with who are interested in this stuff, there is a balance. There is usually, and it's different for everyone, there is a sweet spot to be found in terms of what to remove from the environment and how much then one is able to just actually let go of stuff. Because you see, the level 1 renunciation is only to force the actual letting go. So if you can skip straight to letting go, then you don't have to change anything about your environment. Most people will change some things about their environment. But it kind of goes both ways as well, Because if you can find a way to actually let go of your attachments to pleasures, to instant gratifications, etc., then they'll lose their meaning for you, and then you will throw them out. Or they'll just sit in the corner collecting dust. You just won't need them anymore. You won't want them anymore. So how do we go about doing this, friend? Well, we're going to meditate. We're going to go deep. We're going to explore how to actually let go of things in the mind, in the heart. So, eyes closed. If you're not already in a distraction-free environment, go ahead and pause the video, take yourself off. And with me, when you're ready, 3 long, slow, deep breaths. Filling up those lungs and then releasing the air slowly. Every wisdom teacher ever bangs on about the present moment. We're always talking about the present moment. The breath is always happening in the present moment. And so when you focus on the breath, you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about the future, even if just for a split second. You're not thinking about that instant gratification activity that you'd rather be doing than sitting here meditating with me. The first experiences I ever had with meditation, especially if I tried to do it unguided, were boring as hell. And that's kind of the point. If you can be satisfied sitting here doing nothing, then you can be satisfied anywhere doing anything. This is a really simple way to think about the benefits of meditation, especially in this context of what we're talking about here, renunciation, getting rid of all the stuff in your life that doesn't serve you. Important note, this does not mean you never watch a movie. It means you don't need one. That's the difference. And so, as we sit here together, feel free to continue your long, slow, deep breaths if you're enjoying that, or indeed return to a more regular rhythm of breathing. And bring to mind, if you will, whatever you most feel a craving for. Perhaps it's your next meal, perhaps it's a snack, perhaps it's some experience that you have planned today that you're looking forward to, a video game, some kind of couch potato activity, doom scrolling the feed. Whatever instant gratification activity you're most looking forward to, bring it to mind and consider, what does it do for you when you're thinking about this before having the experience? What does it do for you to have this craving right now? Another way to explore this is one of my favorite thought experiments, is if you were to program a robot to achieve all of your grandest, most ambitious goals, how much code would you dedicate to craving a donut, to wanting to jack off, to binging the next Netflix series, to wishing they were doom scrolling the feed, to thinking about checking their phone? You know, you get that itch to check your phone. Wonder how many notifications I've got. I wonder if this person got back to me. I wonder if that person got back to me. Wonder how many likes my last post got. How much code would you dedicate to that within that robot that you were programming to achieve your most ambitious goals? Now, of course, you're not a robot. That's why this is a thought experiment. And that's why we're not talking here about throwing everything you own away. We're running these experiments, rather, friend, to change your perspective, for you to see, those cravings don't serve me. Those cravings don't actually get me what I want. It feels like I'm getting what I want when I get that little hit of pleasure. But that's just brain chemistry. And a great way to frame the difference here between the fulfillment of those short-term desires versus the fulfillment of your more ambitious long-term goals is that your short-term desires only benefit one person. Just you. Where your long-term, your more ambitious goals typically will benefit others as well. That's why everyone's always banging on about drop those short-term pleasures. Get into the gym, go meditate, work on your business, etc., etc. Because it benefits the whole. A strong body allows you to go for longer. A clear mind allows you to apply yourself more efficiently. And whatever business you build in 2024, certainly if you're following some of my content on business around what I call the mutual benefit business model, that's where you really have the power to benefit people at scale. So that's why everyone's always banging on about, every successful person that you hear from is banging on about dropping those short-term pleasures and aligning instead with that higher purpose. What I'm hoping to do here is to give you a more nuanced, more refined, more subtle experience of how these cravings that you experience in the moment really don't serve you. And that the more you engage in, the more you indulge in those short-term pleasures, the more you want them. It's a bottomless pit, isn't it, friend? There is no amount of Instagram booty you've ever seen that has made you feel, yep, I'm satisfied with the amount of Instagram booty that I've seen now. I'm done. It just doesn't work like that. It is endless. Craving is endless. This is what the Buddha saw. The Buddha also spoke about what he called unification of mind. I was talking about this recently. Unification of mind, meaning where your whole mind in every moment is unified, is congruent. This is a word my friend Sheshan offered up for me just yesterday. He's been using that a lot with his students. Congruency. You're aligned. Head, heart, and gut aligned toward one purpose, one big goal, one big vision. And those big visions always benefit the whole. Try to come up with a big vision that is entirely selfish. Selfish goals tend to be small. But what do you want to remember when you're on your deathbed? What do you want to have spent your life on? What do you want people to say about you at your funeral? He was really good at laying on the sofa scrolling Instagram? Is that what you want people to say? I doubt it. I doubt it. So then comes the whole subject of sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice that moment on the sofa in order for that long-term vision to play out? And again, it's important that we use moderation here, friend. This is not to say never enjoy yourself. Some people like to work in seasons of reaching for those ambitious goals, and then seasons of relaxation. Other people like to balance things daily. It's okay to watch a movie. It's okay to watch a TV show. I remember hearing that Steve Jobs, even in his most intense periods working at Apple, would come home and watch half an hour of TV each day, just to wind down. So we're not saying all or nothing here. And this is kind of why I wanted to record this video on this subject, is because we tend to get the feeling that it's all or nothing. Whether we're listening to wisdom teachers or hyper-successful people, it's easy to pick up the sentiment that it should be all or nothing. Again, either you throw all your shit away and you live like a monk, or you're down the rabbit hole of instant gratification and short-term pleasure. But if there's one thing for you to take away from this video, friend, it's that what we're talking about, the real renunciation, is in the heart and mind. And then you're free to watch that movie or scroll that feed. Though it's interesting, within the mutual benefit business model, of which social media is a huge part, your feed is full of wholesome shit anyway. So here's a good demonstration of that alignment, that congruency, that unification of mind that I was talking about. Everything in your life ends up aligned to that greater purpose. For me, it's normalizing well-being for 1,000,000,001 people. This is what my whole life is arranged around. Again, that doesn't mean that I don't sit with my wife sometimes and enjoy a show in the evening. That's fine. But it does mean that I don't need those things. This is what I want for you, friend. Don't need that stuff. Let it go. Every time you think of it, every time you feel like you want it, remember, there's no way you would program your robot to think like that, to feel like that. In this way, you see through that craving, you see that it doesn't serve you, and it becomes easier and easier to let go. And I'm talking about thousands of moments of recognition like this, friend. Either in a formal sitting meditation like this, or just as you're going about your day. And indeed, you can use the sitting meditation to develop this recognition. Then it becomes easier and easier to make that recognition as you go about your day. So of course you can return to this meditation anytime you please. I'll be here. And I'll see you next time.